Laika was a Soviet space dog who became one of the first animals in space, and the first animal to orbit the Earth. As little was known about the impact of spaceflight on living creatures at the time of Laika's mission, and as the technology to deorbit had not yet been developed, there was no expectation of Laika's survival. Some scientists believed humans would be unable to survive the launch or the conditions of outer space, so engineers viewed flights by animals as a necessary precursor to human missions. Laika, a stray dog from the streets of Moscow, was originally named Kudryavka. She underwent training with 2 other dogs, and was eventually selected to be the occupant of the Soviet spacecraft Sputnik 2 that was launched into outer space on November 3, 1957. Laika died within hours from overheating, possibly caused by a failure of the central A7 sustainer to separate from the payload. The true cause and time of her death were not made public until 2002. Instead, it was widely reported that she died when her oxygen ran out on day 6, or as the Soviet government initially claimed, she was euthanized prior to oxygen depletion. The experiment aimed to prove that a living passenger could survive being launched into orbit and endure weightlessness, paving the way for human spaceflight and providing scientists with some of the first data on how living organisms react to spaceflight environments. On April 11, 2008, Russian officials unveiled a monument to Laika. A small monument in her honor was built near the military research facility in Moscow which prepared Laika's flight to space. It features a dog standing on top of a rocket. Sputnik 2. After the success of Sputnik 1, Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, wanted a spacecraft launched on November 7, 1957, the 40th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. A more sophisticated satellite was already under construction, but it would not be ready until December. This satellite would later become Sputnik 3. To meet the November deadline, a new craft would have to be built. Khrushchev specifically wanted his engineers to deliver a space spectacular, a mission that would repeat the triumph of Sputnik I, stunning the world with Soviet prowess. The planners settled on an orbital flight with a dog. Soviet rocket engineers had long intended a canine orbit before attempting human spaceflight. Since 1951, they had lofted 12 dogs into suborbital space on ballistic flights, working gradually toward an orbital mission possibly sometime in 1958. To satisfy Khrushchev's demands, the orbital canine flight was expedited for the November launch. According to Russian sources, the official decision to launch Sputnik 2 was made on October 10 or 12, leaving the team only 4 weeks to design and build the spacecraft. Sputnik 2, therefore, was something of a rushed job, with most elements of the spacecraft being constructed from rough sketches. Aside from the primary mission of sending a living passenger into space, Sputnik 2 also contained instrumentation for measuring solar radiation and cosmic rays. The craft was equipped with a life support system consisting of an oxygen generator and devices to avoid oxygen poisoning and to absorb carbon dioxide. A fan, designed to activate whenever the cabin temperature exceeded 15 degrees Celsius, was added to keep the dog cool. Enough food was provided for a 7-day flight, and the dog was fitted with a bag to collect waste. A harness was designed to be fitted to the dog, and there were chains to restrict her movements to standing, sitting or lying down. There was no room to turn around in the cabin. An electrocardiogram monitored heart rate and further instrumentation tracked respiration rate, maximum arterial pressure and the dog's movements. Training: Laika was found as a stray wandering the streets of Moscow. Soviet scientists chose to use Moscow strays since they assumed that such animals had already learned to endure conditions of extreme cold and hunger. This specimen was an 11-pound mongrel female, approximately 3 years old. Another account reported that she weighed about 6 kg. Soviet personnel gave her several names and nicknames, among them Kudryavka, Tsuchka and Limonchik. Laika, the Russian name for several breeds of dogs similar to the husky, was the name popularized around the world. The American press dubbed her Mutnik as a pun on Sputnik, or referred to her as Curly. Her true pedigree is unknown, although it is generally accepted that she was part husky or other Nordic breed, and possibly part terrier. A Russian magazine described her temperament as phlegmatic, saying that she did not quarrel with other dogs. Vladimir Yazdovsky, who led the program of test dogs used on rockets, in a later publication wrote that Laika was quiet and charming. The Soviet Union and United States had previously sent animals only on suborbital flights. 3 dogs were trained for the Sputnik 2 flight: Albina, Mushka, and Laika. Soviet space life scientists Vladimir Yazdovsky and Oleg Gazenko trained the dogs. To adapt the dogs to the confines of the tiny cabin of Sputnik 2, they were kept in progressively smaller cages for periods up to 20 days. The extensive close confinement caused them to stop urinating or defecating, made them restless, and caused their general condition to deteriorate. Laxatives did not improve their condition, and the researchers found that only long periods of training proved effective. The dogs were placed in centrifuges that simulated the acceleration of a rocket launch and were placed in machines that simulated the noises of the spacecraft. This caused their pulses to double and their blood pressure to increase by 30–65 torr. The dogs were trained to eat a special high-nutrition gel that would be their food in space. Before the launch, one of the scientists took Laika home to play with his children. In a book chronicling the story of Soviet space medicine, Dr. Vladimir Yazdovsky wrote, "I wanted to do something nice for her, she had so little time left to live." Preflight Preparations, Vladimir Yazdovsky made the final selection of dogs and their designated roles. Laika was to be the flight dog, a sacrifice to science on a one-way mission to space. Albina, who already flew twice on a high-altitude test rocket, was to act as Laika's backup. The third dog, Mushka, was a control dog, she was to stay on the ground and be used to test instrumentation and life support. Before leaving for the Baikonur Cosmodrome, Yazdovsky and Gazenko conducted surgery on the dogs. They routed the cables from the transmitters to the sensors that would measure breathing, pulse and blood pressure. Because the existing airstrip at Chiratam near the Cosmodrome was small, the dogs and crew had to be first flown aboard a Tu-104 plane to Tashkent. From there, a smaller and lighter Il-14 plane took them to Chiratam. Training of dogs continued upon arrival. One after another they were placed in the capsules to get familiar with the feeding system. According to a NASA document, Laika was placed in the capsule of the satellite on October 31, 1957, 3 days before the start of the mission. At that time of year the temperatures at the launch site were extremely cold, and a hose connected to a heater was used to keep her container warm. 2 assistants were assigned to keep a constant watch on Laika before launch. Just prior to liftoff on November 3, 1957 from Baikonur Cosmodrome, Laika's fur was sponged in a weak alcohol solution and carefully groomed, while iodine was painted onto the areas where sensors would be placed to monitor her bodily functions. One of the technicians preparing the capsule before final liftoff states that after placing Laika in the container and before closing the hatch, "We kissed her nose and wished her bon voyage, knowing that she would not survive the flight." Voyage. The exact time of the liftoff varies from source to source and is mentioned as 5:30 and 42 seconds Moscow time or 7:22 Moscow time. At peak acceleration, Laika's respiration increased to between 3 and 4 times the pre-launch rate. The sensors showed her heart rate was 103 beats min before launch and increased to 240 beats min during the early acceleration. After reaching orbit, Sputnik 2's nose cone was jettisoned successfully. However, the blocker core did not separate as planned, preventing the thermal control system from operating correctly. Some of the thermal insulation tore loose, raising the cabin temperature to 40 degrees Celsius. After 3 hours of weightlessness, Laika's pulse rate had settled back to 102 beats min, 3 times longer than it had taken during earlier ground tests, an indication of the stress she was under. The early telemetry indicated that Laika was agitated but eating her food. After approximately 5 to 7 hours into the flight, no further signs of life were received from the spacecraft. The Soviet scientists had planned to euthanize Laika with a poisoned serving of food. For many years, the Soviet Union gave conflicting statements that she had died either from oxygen starvation when the batteries failed, or that she had been euthanized. Many rumors circulated about the exact manner of her death. In 1999, several Russian sources reported that Laika had died when the cabin overheated on the fourth day. In October 2002, Dmitry Malashchenkov, one of the scientists behind the Sputnik 2 mission, revealed that Laika had died by the fourth circuit of flight from overheating. According to a paper he presented to the World Space Congress in Houston, Texas, it turned out that it was practically impossible to create a reliable temperature control system in such limited time constraints. Over 5 months later, after 2,570 orbits, Sputnik 2 disintegrated along with Laika's remains during re-entry on April 14, 1958. Controversy. Due to the overshadowing issue of the Soviet versus US space race, the ethical issues raised by this experiment went largely unaddressed for some time. As newspaper clippings from 1957 show, the press was initially focused on reporting the political perspective, while the health and retrieval or lack thereof of Laika only became an issue later. Sputnik 2 was not designed to be retrievable, and Laika had always been intended to die. The mission sparked a debate across the globe on the mistreatment of animals and animal testing in general to advance science. In the United Kingdom, the National Canine Defence League called on all dog owners to observe a minute's silence, while the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals received protests even before Radio Moscow had finished announcing the launch. Animal rights groups at the time called on members of the public to protest at Soviet embassies. Others demonstrated outside the United Nations in New York. Nevertheless, laboratory researchers in the U.S. offered some support for the Soviets, at least before the news of Laika's death. In the Soviet Union, there was less controversy. Neither the media, books in the following years, nor the public openly questioned the decision to send a dog into space. It was not until 1998, after the collapse of the Soviet regime, that Oleg Gazenko, one of the scientists responsible for sending Laika into space, expressed regret for allowing her to die. Work with animals is a source of suffering to all of us. We treat them like babies who cannot speak. The more time passes, the more I'm sorry about it. We shouldn't have done it. We did not learn enough from this mission to justify the death of the dog. In other Warsaw Pact countries, open criticism of the Soviet space program was difficult because of political censorship, however there were notable cases of criticism in Polish scientific circles. A Polish scientific periodical KTO, KD, Dlaczego, published in 1958, discussed the mission of Sputnik 2. In the periodical's section dedicated to astronautics, Krzysztof Bauer described not bringing Laika back to Earth alive as regrettable, and undoubtedly a great loss for science. Laika is memorialized in the form of a statue and plaque at Star City, Russia, the Russian cosmonaut training facility. Future space missions carrying dogs would be designed to be recovered. The only other dogs to die in a Soviet space mission were Pcholka and Mushka, who died when Korabl Sputnik 3 was purposely destroyed with an explosive charge upon re-entry in order to prevent foreign powers from inspecting the capsule due to a wayward atmospheric re-entry trajectory on December 1, 1960. See also, Monkeys in Space, Notes. References, Anlis, Sarah and Utley, Colin. Science in the Dock, The Man Who Trained the Space Dogs. Retrieved January 28, 2005. Anon. An Internet Memorial to Laika. Retrieved September 1, 2004. Dubs, Chris and Burgess, Colin. Animals in Space, From Research Rockets to the Space Shuttle, 2007. Gran, Sven. Sputnik 2, More News from Distant History. Retrieved September 1, 2004. Mars Exploration Rover Mission, Opportunity arrives at Vostok. Retrieved March 24, 2005. NSSDC Master Catalog, Sputnik 2. Retrieved September 1, 2004. On this day, November 3, 1957, Russians launch dog into space. BBC News. Retrieved September 1, 2004. Soviet fires new satellite, carrying dog. Half-ton sphere is reported 900 miles up. New York Times. Whitehouse, David. First dog in space died within hours, BBC News Online. Zach, Anatoly. The True Story of Laika the Dog Space.com. External links, History of Sputnik missions, Sputnik 2 at Astronautics, original New York Times front page article, November 3, 1957, Laika Memorial page.